Yuji Itadori is changing, a character who's gone through the cycle of a Jujutsu sorcerer, and the most human character in the series. He was brought into the Jujutsu world by two different works of influence, Kenjaku taking his agency as a character and assigning him the role as a vessel, inherently preventing him from directing his own story, and the curse left by his grandpa, which has cultivated his insatiable desire to save people. Overall, Yuji has never truly been his own character, rather has been spearheaded by the expectations and rules placed upon his life. But we've now reached a breaking point for a defining character moment, which sets up as the platform for the next stage of Yuji's Itadori evolution beyond the role of Kenjaku's masterpiece. In terms of Yuji Itadori, his story can easily be placed into three main cycles. Cycle 1, the introduction to his mindset and the conflict surrounding that. Cycle 2, the deconstruction of his mindset and his placement as the main character in the story. Cycle 3 is just about to appear, which is the evolution of Yuji Itadori and essentially being born anew. This video will cover all three and detail to you the cycle of Yuji Itadori. The three main influences when it comes to Yuji's mindset are the importance of saving others, the need to fill a role only he can, and the importance of a death and particularly guiding people to a good death. But to truly understand this, we start at the beginning. The defining moment in Yuji's character arc is ingesting Sukuna, a hero complex, something consistently shown through multiple main characters, and Yuji has a simple goal of wanting to help people. The series in itself challenges this notion on multiple occasions, and the perfect example of this is his foil Mahito. Jujutsu Kaisen's story in itself has a constant battle of ideals. It doesn't conform to the notion of good and evil, allowing for multiple viewpoints to arise. Mahito and Yuji are true perfect examples of this, and the key part of the cycle of Yuji's character. His initial savior complex is contingent on his idea of a good death, and the influence his grandpa had on his life. The story of Yuji Itadori truly is a tragic one. Any significant impact he has on the series serves as a benefit to another user, and seen as a greater punishment for a lack of character agency and byproduct of his motivation stemming from other characters. As mentioned, his desire to save people comes from his grandpa, and being Sukuna's vessel is a role opposed by him. But with the one moment where a choice is brought to him on how he wants to live his life, he chooses the option that is of benefit to others. Yuji's selflessness contrasts that of Sukuna and Mahito, which makes for an interesting dynamic that will be touched upon a little later. His desire to end Sukuna comes from a role only he can fill. In a similar manner, him joining the occult club is stemmed from him being key to keeping the club going. When he battles with Choto, it isn't his individuality that shines through, it's him playing a role since he doesn't need to be the one to free Gojo. Or his initial overwhelming desire to stop Mahito coming from being the only person that can truly threaten Mahito's existence. Again, a role he can only fill. Even with Nanami dying, his words are not one of self-motivation, but to take on Nanami's share of suffering, putting his sincerity at the forefront of his mission. The consistency of Yuji wanting to fill a role coming from something that makes him unique cultivates his overwhelming desire to be helpful even if it's at the cost of his own life, showing his lack of self-worth. The importance of a role, or an overwhelming feeling of having a place to belong, is consistent through multiple characters. Naoya's changed to his sole purpose of being Zenin clan leader. Maki wants to spite the clan that dismisses her worth. Gojo relishes in his persona as the strongest, but struggles with the isolation it brings. Every character has a struggle related to the role imposed on them, and either finds ways to break through it, or become a victim of said role. In Gojo's case, his role led to his own salvation through death, where the role imposed on him no longer bears a burden towards him. Mei's role of service potential ensures she's only ever benefits. She doesn't do more than what's required of her, and only works in her self-interest. In a way, she's constantly put in great situations and experiences minimum hardship. In essence, her role is a blessing to her. Overall, a role is also a curse upon the user, but depending on how the character interacts with said role, it can also be a blessing. Nanami in 236 said, "A curse can save people too." This quote in itself is impactful and perfectly explains the curse of a role. To take it to a step further, Gojo explains curses are born from human hearts. His explanation was in reference to a standard curse spirit, but the phrasing of the next quote, "a ruthless choice of life and death," can also represent the nature of a curse within a user. As the examples used, Gojo's curse was solved through death. However, other characters have the option to use their curses to cling to life. An example is Yuji's overwhelming mental fortitude to atone for his mistakes, but I'll get back to that a little later. Overall, in Yuji's case, his role gave him a platform to be of benefit to others and to maximize the truest form of his nature, being selflessness. But the story in itself punishes for that, and what could be the reason for that? To understand the reason for this, we have to analyze the concept of what a good death is, but his role has got him stuck in the perpetual cycle of being a cog and the deeper cycle of being a Jujutsu sorcerer. His motivations are entirely dependent on those around him, and Sukuna is a cage for Yuji just as much as Yuji is a cage for Sukuna. But it goes deeper than that, but let me circle that back to Mahito. Death is a mirror for humanity, and Mahito is that mirror. Sukuna, Yuji, and Mahito all embody a key trait within the series, which is the concept of death. Yuji is stemmed from preventing his concept of a bad death, which is inherently flawed, which is why he's made to fail. Mahito reflects the true nature of humanity through death, and ironically his own nature, as the moment of death served as an irony moment that he's just as foolish as the humans he toys with. Sukuna rejects the notion of the fear of death, and rather attributes his worth to living, meaning him losing a fight is akin to death, as he loses his entire purpose of who he is. Treating all stages of life as equal and providing relief to those who oppose his ideals, he acts as the Grim Reaper of the series, but also fails to understand the complexities of humanity as he's detached from those feelings, which will serve as an important factor later on his character arc, especially as Yuji exposes more of who he is. These characters in particular are key to what occurs with Yuji's resolve, and more importantly will further impact his character arc. To circle back to the question posed, does Yuji truly know what a good death is? His grandpa died without passing on the final words to Yuji. Is his naivety of him going out peacefully clouded his own judgment on what a good death is? Yes, the story constantly punished him for that and shows the naivety of that one assumption. Not to mention it contradicts his own thesis of he doesn't want to live a life of regret but dismiss his grandpa's last regrets. The first moment of acknowledgement of that is the Fearsome Moon arc, where he connects the idea of a natural death as foolish in the midst of a near-death situation, and was unable to fully resolve his mentality, leading him to be content with dying. His next moment of acknowledgement is with Nanami, after the Versus Mahito arc, and he identifies his ideology as flawed. This serves as the first evolution of Yuji, but let me spin this back to Sukuna real quick. In contrast, Sukuna grants pretty much everyone he interacts with a fulfilling death, in which they feel content with the answer they reached when fighting him. Gojo has fulfillment, Yuzo felt acknowledged, Kashimo reached the answer he was longing, and Jogo understood truly what it was he lacked. In most simplistic manner, Sukuna's character devoid of ideals allows people to reach him and come to a great answer, as the dominant factor facing Sukuna is that you will die. So in the heat of the moment, characters come into realizations which is consistent with the concept of your life flashing before your eyes. On the other hand, Yuji imposes his ideals onto his grandpa, and in return receives the curse his grandpa gave him. This isn't Yuji being selfish, but the conclusion he came to on what a good death is. This is the forefront of the flaw in Yuji, his overwhelming sincerity. A character who shares that similarity is Jogo. Both Yuji and Jogo have their own respective strong ideals. Jogo wants the new age of curses to come about, and constantly talks about the naivety of the human race, ignoring the truest form of their nature. After more exposition is shown, the curse born with the human intellect share the same traits of the humans. He curses and have a strong bond within their respective group, really setting the template for the I am you with Mahito and Yuji. The irony within his character and why his plans fail to come to fruition is he's content with his plans occurring beyond his existence, meaning he lacks the fundamentals needed to seize his ideals. Yuji wants to lead characters to a good death, but is content with entrusting others to save Gojo or self-sacrifice as long as his role is completed. Jogo wants to become the true humans, but will entrust his goals to Sukuna due to the nature of being reincarnated. They don't truly embody their ideals, which is why they lose, and are content with their ideals being inherited. With Jogo, his realization comes through his death, which is one of the pathways to uncover the truth of one's role. Ironically, a quote he stated himself, "Real strength and truth, through death it will be spread." In Yuji's case, is deconstructed which leads to the acceptance phase, which is shown through his clash with Mahito. Yuji as a character is one who hasn't shied away from redeemingly morally great characters, but in the fanbook the one thing Yuji Itadori has been stated to not be able to understand is an evil person. His resentment for both Mahito and Sukuna is understood a lot more, with the context and their ideological clashes sets up to a key arc for Yuji Itadori. The main 2 points of his character arc that are challenged is his savior complex and the concept of what a good death is, and his realization of becoming the very thing he hates, a murderer. Yuji in itself is a character who's had many discussions on his role as the main character. Beforehand I said Yuji is a case for Sukuna just as much as Sukuna is a case for Yuji, and it starts with the characterization of him. Agency is probably the greatest testament to what it means to be a main character. They're at the forefront of driving the story, but Yuji is a deconstruction of that trope and also fits the trope perfectly, and it begins with his birth. Yuji was always meant to be Sukuna's vessel, meaning his fate was tied to someone else's existence, not his own, reducing him as a main character. Yet at the same time he's also the chosen one, the 1 in a million potential to inhabit Sukuna, and the one who was happened to be in relation to the reincarnation of Sukuna's twin. In contrast, Sukuna denied his fate from early, taking his agency from birth, and why he's an overwhelming force within the series. When Yuji meets characters for the first time, he's referred to as Sukuna's vessel, an object of fear. Yuji the main character doesn't exist, rather the role imposed on him which is of what interest. This in essence reduces Yuji to nothing more than that assigned role, taking away his agency, which in some meta commentary he isn't truly the main character, rather a byproduct of the thing he's meant to destroy. The truest form of Yuji's desire beyond his role is that he's strong enough to choose how he dies. But let me reference this a little later as it will be important. Mahito serves as the initial foil to deconstruct his hero complex. After the conflict with Junpei, Yuji begins to question himself with giving into the murderous intent to kill Mahito. The concept of their character arcs is accepting they are similar to one another, and Mahito's interest in humanity and correcting their ignorance leads to a beautiful dynamic. If Yuji represents the truest form of kindness and humanity, Mahito represents the truest form of hatred and a byproduct of what it means to be a true curse, and why them being mortal enemies, figuratively and metaphorically, works so well. The underlying theme of the concept of curses is humanity breed the fear of curses, so coming to the conclusion that they are the same builds on some great thematic framework. Yuji accepting he's just like Mahito, and even his choice of words being kill instead of exercise. He comes full circle to become the very thing he hates, a murderer. This is spearheaded by the deity far above all of them, Ryuman Sukuna. Now Sukuna told Yuji his actions led to countless people dying in Shibuya. Sukuna warned Yuji on multiple occasions his choice will lead to people to die due to his actions, and with the countless people have been affected from his selflessness. Enchain and his lack of self-worth indirectly contributed to some of the most significant plot lines, and this was set up nicely for Yuji to ascend beyond his current role. But in the case of Mahito, as mentioned, he accepted he's just like Mahito and he's nothing more than a cog, shackling him to the mindset that has burdened him post Mahito. This concludes the impact Mahito has on Yuji's character arc, without focusing a significant amount of time on their entire dynamic. This sets up the true clash of Sukuna and Yuji, which sets up for the third cycle of his evolution. In the most recent chapter, we have learned that Sukuna and Yuji are related, with Sukuna's twin brother being Jin Itadori. Sukuna breaking through his fate of twin omen by eating his brothers, and Yuji inheriting strength through his brothers set up some interesting stuff at the surface. Even the imposing of a role on both their characters, Sukuna's disregard fits perfectly with him being unwanted and with him eating his twin. Yet Yuji, with all his gifts, clings onto the role only he can belong in, paralleling how they experience their work of life. Sukuna also taken away the shackles of his cage in 2 occasions, through his birth of eating his twin and discarding his humanity, and breaking through the cage of Yuji, taking back his agency within the story. The story constantly blesses those with a stronger sense of self, and currently the story wraps its way towards Sukuna. But more importantly, Sukuna denies the fate set to his character, and takes the realm of the story literally and narratively. For example, Megumi awakened his domain expansion by listening to Sukuna's words. Maki with her hate char broke through her chains and experienced freedom. The story in itself blesses those with a stronger sense of self for now, which is directly correlated with Sukuna's entire mindset. By taking to a step further, the premise of I Am You runs deeply with Sukuna and Yuji, who both impact each other, and it starts off with his evolution. The cycle of curses is something consistently brought up in Jujutsu Kaisen, but this chapter has added a greater emphasis to the concept of reincarnation. Tengen and Six Eyes, Juve having a second incarnation, and now Sukuna's twin brother Soul being a part of Jin Itadori, the overall concept relates to the cynical nature of the Jujutsu world. But Yuji has gone through each stage of a cycle, specifically that in Buddhism. Life, death, and now rebirth. Life. The ingesting of the finger, also being sealed with a finger, and the curse given to him by his grandpa. Death. Physical death, one in Fearsome Womb and the other one in Shibuya. To set up the ending of the mindset and being freed from his initial cage, Sukuna. Rebirth. The current path we're on, and once Sukuna left his body, his strength increased, serving as a commentary that Sukuna was mentally and physically holding him back, and now the moment to his own mindset coming to pass, shown with the Sukuna eyes and the awakening. Funnily enough, the 3 cycles I mentioned represent the concept of this Buddhist process, and there's also some history importance to it. First, let's start with the spiral eyes. Shout out Reddit. In Egyptian culture, it highlights the cycle of life and death. In Buddhism, it represents the third eye and enlightenment. In Hinduism, it represents the third eye and the god of Shiva. Now, with Sukuna already having parallels to Shiva and the whole concept of life and death, it correlates to an awakening of Yuji and makes a lot of sense. The first time this occurs is once Sukuna leaves his body in 214. Currently, we've seen Yuji basically act as if he can use black flash at will, a phenomenon that's supposed to be luck-based. Being basically done at will can be some commentary of Yuji breaking through his own fate. But let me slow this down for a bit and relate this back to Sukuna, because both characters are important to their respective arcs. I'm you. One of the most important aspects in Yuji's character arc. What if that cycle repeated again? Sukuna for the first time embraced the importance of ideals due to be sharing a soul with a human and being forced to take inspiration from the one thing he dislikes. With new knowledge that Yuji's dad being Sukuna's twin, him inheriting the humanity that Sukuna disregarded would be beautiful and add another level to his hatred towards him. The importance of this is they're fated to take things from one another. It's no surprise that Yuji has the same potential like Sukuna because they're different sides of the same coin. If Mahito and Yuji were the mental and physical foils, then Sukuna and Yuji are the spiritual foils in which they share the same soul but different ideals. In essence, Mahito and Yuji are the body, but Sukuna and Yuji are the soul, fully completing Yuji's complex with the 2 main opposition. The conclusion is they can have the inverse of the character arcs, where Yuji will have a stronger sense of self and Sukuna will become more human by force, as the only one who can threaten his existence is Yuji. Yuji is currently nonchalant, calm in his goal of killing Sukuna, while Sukuna is a little bit more outraged at Yuji. They've begun to switch their roles, which can only be possible due to their souls being linked. Even the concept of yin and yang perfectly describes their dynamic. In this case, Yuji being the tiger and Sukuna being the dragon. In short, the dragon represents strength beyond the heavens. His energy causes rain clouds to swell and the waves to form, fitting the characterization of a natural calamity. Whereas the tiger is powerful and quiet, and its territory is that of earth. Beyond all of this, they're evenly matched and can represent Kenjaku's idea of the eye of the storm, being 2 forces meant to oppose each other. But the most important thing is that they complement each other and why Yuji's appearance is such a burden to Sukuna. He's the antithesis to the way of his life. He disproves his way of thinking and constantly reminds him he's delusional just like everybody else. But let me save that for Sukuna analysis, so stay tuned for that. Yuji has now cemented himself to become the person beyond the role assigned to him, and it starts with the strongest sense of self. This will allow him to reach his truest goal, which is being strong enough to choose how he dies. Beyond his sincerity, beyond his role as a Jujutsu sorcerer, and beyond wanting to end Sukuna and Mahito, the one goal that was truly his was to live a life without regrets. This influenced by his grandpa, but even after coming to the conclusion the idea of a good death was flawed, the one key ideology that was consistent was to be strong enough to die on his terms. Now he's reached the pinnacle of that occurring, but he's also doomed to have the same issue that comes with a strong sense of self. Gojo was never truly understood. Kashima was unsure whether he was correct to live the way he did. Sukuna is isolated. If Yuji is going on the path to a stronger sense of self, it could be the detriment of his core values. But first, what is a strong sense of self? The concept of self comes from Buddhism. The idea is that self exists, however, it is not what we think it is, leading us to have a delusional self. The concept resides in people having a delusional sense of self, which leads to people being unhappy. In the case of Sukuna, he represents the pinnacle of a strong sense of self. And in Yuji's case, his unshakable idea to stop Sukuna has led him to a dangerous path. The Yuji we first met didn't want to hurt transfigured humans, but will eat anything to destroy Sukuna. As a community, we've grown to accept it, but eating your brothers as a power-up is very inhumane and sets up a dangerous path for our main character. Let's look at the comparisons with Sukuna. Both gain strength from consuming, an unshakable need to get stronger to satisfy their ideals. And what if the consequence of him achieving his goal isolates him from everyone else? A strong sense of self works like a trade-off in Jujutsu Kaisen. Like I said, Gojo not being understood, Sukuna's isolation, without going through multiple cases of sense of self, is met with some give or take procedure. If the forefront of his character is sincerity, the biggest concern is him throwing away his humanity to stop Sukuna. Now I don't mean this completely, I don't see Yuji ever changing completely from his original character, but in the same manner Yuji impacts Sukuna, the reverse is occurring, which means the cost of a stronger sense of self could be something more than Yuji bargained for. Overall, his evolution of his mindset, even his technique interpretation, was trying being befitted of his nature, has set up perfectly for Yuji to grow from his previous shackles. But with still the full reveal of Kenjaku's purpose for Yuji, why is he so abnormally strong? He may reach his goal of dying on his own terms, but it might be at greater cost than he initially bargained for, which fully completes the cycle of Itadori Yuji.